You're watching? No, Simon stops making a noise. You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next 60 minutes maybe, we are going to be talking about the Grand Moffs Specials, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
I am Matt.
I'm Simon.
And yeah, we have arrived. Last Christmas we did Russell T Davies's Christmas specials and other specials. This Christmas we are doing Steven Moffat's specials and other specials. And we have, of course, polled our followers on Facebook to find out which ones they liked the most and which the least. It will come as no surprise to find that one is head and shoulders above the rest. So I think actually this poll is more interesting for what comes, well, I would say what comes second, but that's pretty obvious and pretty far out in front of the others too. So maybe third place is the one that's really interesting in this poll. And there is, of course, one that's way behind all the others, which we'll get to in a minute. There are some general comments, so I'll do the general comments. Rod Brown says, what a variety of styles. Capaldi alone goes from horror fantasy to comic tragedy to superheroes to sci-fi. Yet there's an undeniable consistency of quality that's present across the vast majority of Moffat's work. Luke Hammond says the Day of the Doctor aside, which should of course have its own special status above these non-anniversary Christmas specials, and he's not wrong, but there's nowhere else to put it except in this poll. And A Christmas Carol, which is an obvious but heart-wrenchingly genius idea, the best of the bunch are the ones which pick up and progress the continuing story and have some texture and depth, rather than the standalone RTD-style festive romps, even if they are mostly really fun and more accessible to the casual viewer. David Kitchen says, apart from Day of the Doctor, which is excellent, although as time passes, the cracks in the story do start to show. I don't know what he's talking about. I think he's got his arse about his face. He says, there's not a lot there to excite me. So I don't know what he's talking about there either.
They are winning the cricket, though, so it's
Well, they can clearly do cricket, but that doesn't mean to say they know about Doctor Who, right? You mean Australians, obviously. He says there's not a lot there to excite me. I don't mind the return of Dr. Mysterio, but none of the others are really my vibe, he says. Alex Newsom says after the two big hitters of his era, that being Day of the Doctor and A Christmas Carol, Moffat's specials are quite hard to rank, as while all quite different, they all hit a similar sweet spot for me, bar the bottom entry, which he puts as The Widow in the Wardrobe and so on.
Oh.
Well, yeah, I think fair point there. He says, though I'd still rather watch that than Planet of the Dead. That he achieved such a consistency right through his tenure, while also writing all of them solo, is a real testament to his quality of his take on the show. Ian Charles says, truly the full spectrum of quality in this lot. Lance Harrington says, to be honest, there's not much between any of them, really. Day is the standout special for me, with the rest all being much of a muchness. Daniel West, overall, it's a tribute to Moffat that I find 7 out of 9 of these as outstanding Doctor Who. And John Arnold says the top two, Day of the Doctor and The Husbands of River Song, are all-time gold for me, both candidates for any top 10 I'd make. Really, there's nothing here I don't thoroughly enjoy, though. It's a selection box filled with all the best chocolates. And I think with one exception, he's not wrong. I think the Moffat Christmas specials, even the slightly weaker ones, are still pretty magical. I think Steven Moffat just knew how to do it, frankly. With one exception. Simon, what's your feeling on the Steven Moffat specials?
Emotion, really. He manages to extract emotion from you without doing it in some blatant kind of Coronation Street way, because they're poetic and because they touch on real emotions. I think because I think that Steven Moffat as a writer taps into real life experiences, and I think he's a people watcher, and I think he understands certain social, and maybe has a fascination with certain social machinations, and he taps into those, and I think that's why they're so affecting. So yeah, in general, I think they are very special Christmas specials because of that they make you feel something at that time of year.
I cannot disagree. Matt, on the other hand, notorious for not liking Christmas specials. So what do you think of the Steven Moffat ones?
Well, I've rewatched a couple recently, and I kind of like them. So I think I don't like Christmas specials on Christmas because there's a certain pressure to watching Doctor Who on Christmas Day, I think. Whereas when you're watching it at another time of the year, maybe rewatching it, the Christmasness becomes less important, and you can just enjoy the wit and the story. I think
much like the Ted Lasso Christmas special that came out in the middle of the year.
Yeah, but that was weird.
And of course, Die Hard came out in the middle of summer too, but we'll talk about that.
And Big Finish had released the box of Delights in July, which I found a little bit odd, but I guess people buy it to prepare. I think I agree that one of the distinctive things about it is variety, and so he does 8 Christmas specials, and after Russell T Davies does his, where Russell T Davies basically goes back and back to try and make it Christmassy. There is a kind of comfort in that, but I think Steven Moffat, to stop himself from going mad and getting bored, he finds different angles to take on what Christmassy is and what a Christmas special means and how to connect it to Christmas, sometimes more successfully than others. But I think coming after Russell T Davies, it meant that Steven Moffat could be more inventive. He could be more atmospheric about it. He could shift tones a bit more, because he had the limitations of not being able to redo what Russell T Davies did, but those limitations gave him a certain amount of freedom to just go for it.
I think there's something a bit more as well, because I think Russell T Davies at Christmas just wrote a romp and threw a few Christmas trimmings in to make it feel Christmassy, whereas Steven Moffat seems to write Christmas stories, even the ones that aren't necessarily set at Christmas. All of the Steven Moffat ones really are about personal journeys in the same way as most Christmas stories are. So if you watch the Channel 5 Christmas films, or Hallmark Christmas films as they would be in America, or if you watch the various versions of the Christmas classics and whatever, there's always a personal kind of a journey that's taking place, and I think that's largely what Steven Moffat taps into. So even something like The Return of Dr. Mysterio, which, apart from a couple of scenes right at the start of the episode set at Christmas, doesn't really take place at Christmas at all, and it's not really a very Christmassy Christmas special in any other respect. I think The Return of Dr. Mysterio follows the character beats of a Christmas story, and I think that's what helps elevate Steven Moffat's Christmas specials above the sort of general thrust of ordinary run-of-the-mill Doctor Who. I think these are sort of Doctor Who plus poetry, as Simon said, and that makes them something different and something outstanding, I think.
Well, that's not far off from what Steven Moffat does with normal Doctor Who.
That's
he's very
true.
interested in personal journeys, so he amplifies it slightly, and he does add the sort of Christmas trappings to the series, but this is his style.
Yeah.
He also he applies kind of public knowledge motifs as well, doesn't he? Touches on like movies like Alien that would be instantly recognisable by
Superman
to the average punter. And Lion the Witch in the Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe, obviously, and things like that. So recognisability.
Speaking of which, in ninth place on 14.17%, so way out at the bottom, Earl Eklund III says Madge is greatly underrated. He puts it second. I think Steven Moffat stymies himself with The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe. Ordinarily, Steven Moffat will set up a bunch of plays, and I've always said this about Steven Moffat's writing. He sets you a mystery just after he's given you the solution to the mystery, so you don't realise that the thing you're looking for is the thing that you saw before you realised you were looking for something. I think with The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, he forgets to spin the plates. So once you get past the opening sort of 15 minutes or so, I think the first sort of 15 minutes or so of The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe is fantastic. But then as soon as they go through the wardrobe and off to the alien planet, everybody's split up and there aren't enough of them in order for him to do the usual things he does. So Steven Moffat, in this one episode, doesn't get to do the sort of twists and turns the emotional twists and turns as well as the narrative twists and turns that make you feel warm and rosy and give you surprises at the same time as you get towards the back end of the episode. And so for about 40 minutes, this is basically an episode that's not actually doing anything, and it just sort of sits there and stares at you. And so for me, this is the one Steven Moffat episode that I actually find boring, which is not to say I think it's the worst thing I've ever seen on TV, but I am bored by this episode, and it's astonishing that Steven Moffat has written something that can bore me, but that's how I feel about it. Matt, how about you?
I think it picks up once they go through the time portal, because I think there's a certain simplicity about the story. It's not a typical Steven Moffat story. It's very obviously a kind of a homage to the kind of Narnia stuff, obviously. But that has got this kind of journey story narrative, this sort of exploration narrative. And so it's about atmosphere, and it's about place, and it's about the idea of these kind of wooden creatures, these kind of wooden king and queen, and the forest. So there's an atmosphere to it, and there's a kind of it's not fast paced. It's not it's not a superhero thing. It's not a Titanic pastiche. It's just this kind of sort of cautiously paced kind of C.S. Lewis pastiche, this journey through the forest. And there's something, pleasant about that. There's something nice about that.
Simon?
I agree. I think maybe it relies on that familiarity, maybe a little bit too much. I'd be interested to read a script, actually, to kind of detach it from what you see on television, to see whether it feels like there's more there than the cosmetic side. And I think I experienced a certain amount of disappointment because I'm a big fan of those E. Nesbitt and C.S. Lewis feelings and atmospheres. But I think it says a lot that I don't really tend to remember much about it and have very little to say about it. I think that speaks volumes, really.
Speaking of things that people didn't have much to say about, on 28.33%, no listener comments. So can you guess what it is?
Mysterio?
Well, indeed it is, and I gave you a clue there because David Kitchen, of course, mentioned it. The Return of Dr. Mysterio then came in 8th. So it's way above Doctor the Widow and the Wardrobe. I love this. I was really pleasantly surprised by this. I wasn't really expecting a lot. Didn't really know quite what to expect from it. And I remember the year it was on, I wasn't able to watch it until fairly late in the evening. So 10 o'clock or something, I think it was, before I was able to sit down and watch it. And I remember sitting down thinking, I'm a bit tired. I might struggle a bit with this. And it's a sort of superhero-y thing, and I'm not really into superhero-y things, as you obviously know. And I thought I might struggle. And after about 3 minutes, I was beaming from ear to ear. And that great big smile on my face remained there for the next sort of 50-odd minutes. And, that's what kept me up. That's what kept me awake. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought the emotional journeys were sort of typical Steven Moffat emotional journeys in this really sort of atypical Steven Moffat shell. So the sort of superhero thing, which I thought he sort of nicely made a part of the sort of logical fabric of Doctor Who, worked really nicely, and all these elements that didn't feel as though they ought to fit together just did. So I really, really enjoyed the Return of Dr. Mysterio. Simon?
I have to hold my hands up as a lifelong superhero fan, that there was a certain amount of snobbery on my part in that I was a little bit dubious about it as to how a BBC production was going to do a superhero story, because it's always a little bit uncomfortable if they how they approach it. But I mean, I should have had more confidence in Steven Moffat as a writer anyway. But there were things in there I didn't quite buy the explanation as why he got the powers. That this, I refrain on saying ridiculous, but I do feel it's slightly ridiculous. The boy swallowing this thing, it didn't seem to make any sense.
Oh, come on!
It didn't make any
Where's
sense.
your soul?
Well, I suppose it made sense in a comedy way, in a Red Dwarf kind of way, but I don't know whether it really. I didn't buy it, but but it did explain things. And what can I say? I didn't mind it. I didn't mind it. I didn't think it was particularly bad, but I just don't remember really latching onto the story. Maybe I need to revisit it with a fresh mind. But
Perfect time of year to do so.
yeah, I probably will. But yeah, I think on my voting, this was just above Doctor the Widow and the Wardrobe.
Fair enough. Matt, how about you?
Pretty rock bottom on my voting. I'm not a massive Doctor Who. I'm not a massive Doctor Who fan. I'm not a massive superhero fan. But I do like the kind of Marvel movies. I didn't have a problem necessarily with the idea of the BBC doing it. I liked the fact it was going to be set in New York because Steven Moffat had already very successfully, I thought, set a story in New York with Angels Take Manhattan. And this didn't get near to that kind of atmosphere or that kind of actually using New York as a location or as a potential location. And this is a Christmas special. So this felt really kind of superficial and flat for me because it didn't feel like it had a sense of place. It felt I knew exactly what it was trying to pastiche. And for me, that subject wasn't really a Christmassy subject. It's not like I could just about understand Russell T Davies going for the Titanic movie because of the Poseidon Adventure. I could see how somebody of Russell T Davies's age would think of the Poseidon Adventure as a Christmas movie. I'm fine with that. But superhero movies, not really.
Superman the movie?
No, not really. It's never struck me as a particularly Christmassy movie. Bond films, yeah. Great Escape, maybe, if you'd done the pastiche of The Great Escape or a Bond movie. Superhero movies. But then
maybe you're the wrong age. Superman the movie, I think, was ITV's big Christmas movie in December of 1982 or something. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's that period of premiering big movies at Christmas.
Well, that's fine. But if I'm the wrong age, then a significant portion of the audience watching this was the wrong age.
Well, but they would be for the Poseidon Adventure too. I think I was just replying to the point you were making.
Having said that, I think Doctor the Widow, the Wardrobe has more atmosphere to it, more soul to it. So I think, well, if Simon doesn't have a soul, not getting on board with a superhero pastiche in Doctor Who, if you can't get on board with a Doctor Who story set in the forest with a wooden king and queen, then I guess that's the parallel. Yeah, it wasn't for me. It didn't feel like a special. It felt like a sort of bland Russell T Davies opener, I think.
Maybe then you'll like the story that came in 7th a bit more. This is going to be a bit more controversial, so there's a bunch of comments about this one. David Kitchen says, I know on broadcast you guys defended this, and that's fine, but for me personally, the nastiness and willfully false portrayal of the first Doctor soured the whole thing in a very big way, and he votes it 9th. I think he's taking this television programme a bit too personally there.
No, it's fine.
Earl Eklund III says the completely off-base portrayal of the first Doctor sinks this one. He votes it 9th, and so does Jeff Waddell, who says atrocious for the portrayal of the first Doctor. Ian Charles shouldn't have had to be made. He says he votes it 7th. Alistair Thwaite votes it 3rd and says Capaldi's reading of Doctor I Let You Go gives me goosebumps. Meanwhile, Steve Herr votes it 2nd, so he's only got Day of the Doctor above it, and he says every comedic element of the first Doctor was cranked up to make the perfect foil for the 12th. And I think this is kind of the point that a lot of people miss. This isn't a story about the first Doctor. This is a story about the 12th Doctor, in which the first Doctor is a supporting character, and therefore the first Doctor is boiled down to the essence of that initial first Doctor that needs to be there in order to offset what they're trying to say about the 12th Doctor. And what Steven Moffat's doing, knowing Jodie Whittaker is on the horizon, is setting up for the change in gender between the 12th Doctor and the 13th. So he goes back to basics, gets the first Doctor, and it's a slightly skewed version of the first Doctor, but it's no more skewed than the version of the first Doctor we had in the 5 Doctors. And it's no more skewed than the version of the first Doctor we had in the 3 Doctors, really. Where Twice Upon a Time doesn't quite work is that there's no real nemesis for the Doctor. So there's sort of plot of it kind of fizzles out about 2/3 of the way through the episode, 3/4 of the way through the episode. It's a really nice episode. I really like it. I don't mind at all the portrayal of the First Doctor. Ian Levine said quite publicly this is the first Doctor he remembers from when he was watching Doctor Who when he was a kid. So that's somebody who's very vocal about the things in Doctor Who he dislikes. I thought Twice Upon a Time was fine. I didn't think it was the most excellent of Doctor Who episodes or of Christmas specials, but I thought it was fine. I quite liked the stuff about the Brigadier, or Brigadier's father, grandfather, whatever it was. The war stuff was such an obvious idea, it's surprising they hadn't got there earlier, but they did here. I don't know, it's fine. I don't know. Matt, how about you? What do you think of it?
Yeah, I think it's fine. The First Doctor stuff genuinely didn't upset me. And I think if it had upset me, I would have rationaled it that this is at the end of the First Doctor's period, when he's erratic anyway. And it's presumably just as he's about to regenerate, so he'll be erratic anyway. But as you say, William Hartnell's portrayal is still there, most of it, or some of it is still there to watch. And this doesn't kind of betray anything. It just, if anything, reformats this character as kind of comic relief. And if you're of a mind to think that comic relief is something to be ashamed of in the character, then that's a problem. That's when you start getting serious about Sontarans. And I don't think it is. I think the comic characters in Doctor Who are the best characters. They're the ones I'd watch it for. So if there was another story with David Bradley playing the First Doctor, I'd look forward to it because I knew that he'd give a really witty performance and they'd draw out the comedy. And the comedy has to be, in contrast with the latest Doctor, with the 12th Doctor and the modern world. You're not sort of betraying an old character. You're basically kind of distilling kind of off-kilter tastes from the 1960s and using them for comic effect.
They have to be opposites, otherwise the story doesn't work.
And actually, that comedy kind of lifts the story, because this is quite a sort of meditative, slow kind of maudlin story. It's got a sweetness at it because it doesn't have a villain, which I don't mind. It's not a rip-roaring like excitement roller coaster, but then it comes after the Doctor falls, which was that. It feels like an adjunct. It feels like a sort of coda to the 12th Doctor, which is sort of uncomfortable or unusual perhaps, but I think there's room for it. I think there's room for this kind of slow exploration of what the 12th Doctor thinks he is and what he sees his future as, because that's what the 12th Doctor's been. He's this sort of Doctor that constantly wonders who he is, what he's doing, and sort of self-analyzes. So yeah, it's fine. It's not the greatest hour of Doctor Who for me, but it's memorable.
Simon, is it the greatest hour of Doctor Who for you?
No, but I'm on dodgy ground for asking people to maybe not be, is precious the wrong word? I don't know, but I think linking up with that old chestnut of the cyber brig, I think that you've got to reach a point where you separate the character and allow the character to be part of a story rather than something that you apply. I don't know, fixation's the wrong word, but to kind of set it in stone as to, it's this because it means this to me. But you've got to kind of allow the writer to be the artist and to have a play about, I think, as we've been experiencing with Chris Chibnall. So as Matt was, as you both were saying, that this distillation of the First Doctor was suiting a purpose as far as comedy is concerned, but also, making a point, and it had been distilled down to these key elements that allow us to take a look back, and for the Doctor to take a look back of where he's been and where he's got to and where the series is going. And I just think you've got to allow, to a degree, you've got to take a step back and maybe chill a bit. Oh dear, I'm trying not to tell people to chill, but I think in order to enjoy it, you've got to take a step back and to not think it's this way and not this way, and that it's any kind of reflection on the actors who played that part.
Given how varied Doctor Who has been over the nearly 60 years now that it's been around, given how much variety there's been, it's very strange to have fixed ideas of what it should be.
Yeah, maybe so. I think we're all guilty of it, and with Doctor Mysterio, I just had fixed ideas of what a superhero should be, and I got a little bit snobbish about it, which impinged on my enjoyment of that episode. And it'll be nice to, as I say, personally, take a step back from that and watch it completely fresh, and not have any pre-assumptions of what it should or shouldn't be, and just allow it to be.
In sixth place, on 45%, The Husbands of River Song. And I've said my thing about this a bunch of times. I think this is a story about two people who've not seen each other for years, not recognising each other, or at least one of them not recognising the other. I think it's a great big metaphor for growing older, frankly. I think that's what this story's really about. And the way this story ends with that, let's spend this one last night that happens to last for 24 years, I think that's part of this metaphor for growing older, for moving on, for cutting ties with the things that were important to you when you were younger, for making decisions about the things that are going to be important to you in the future. I think The Husbands of River Song, for 45 minutes, it's just this fast-paced, hilarious romp that doesn't seem to be about anything. And then in the last quarter of an hour, as he so often does, Steven Moffat pulls this enormous rug out from under you and makes you realise how emotionally involved you are with all the things that you thought were just there to be funny. And it's just an amazing deceit and an amazing piece of television. And I think it's fantastic, frankly. It's not one of the sort of top 3 or 4 in this list, but I still think it's absolutely fantastic. Simon?
Yeah, it's really great. I think it exists purely for that like you said, that last 15 minutes. I could get quite deep about this because I love the idea that the Doctor and River finally spend a good chunk of lifetime together. I think that's the essence we get from it. And that is, as somebody who met his life partner quite late in life, I think there is an understanding that you make this commitment to spend the rest of your life with this person. I mean, yeah, even if you meet somebody very young, but everything comes to an end, and there's a period of time, and if you make that commitment and you throw yourself into that, I think it's a very special thing. It's not a depressing thing, as some people might think. And I think it's one of these emotions that Steven Moffat taps into, which are really beautiful. And it's another thing when I find it quite upsetting when Steven Moffat gets criticism and gets attacks on his personality, that you see these deep thoughts happening in something as simple as Doctor Who. It's very, very hard for me. It's very hard to reconcile a lot of those things. So a really beautiful episode.
Matt?
I know you met your life partner quite late in life, but it's really is a shame that Lee doesn't do the podcast more often. So it'd be nice to see him again.
Thanks for knocking that one down to your level, Matt.
Sorry. You expected something else? This is fine. Yeah, this is okay. I remember watching it. I think because it does, as you both suggested, it does sort of pivot towards the end. So when you're watching it the first time, your kind of brain is tuned to Great Escape romp, and then you have to flip it to something else. But yeah, I don't think this is in the top echelons of the Christmas specials, but this is a nice kind of end point for the River Song story. Whether that's appropriate for a Christmas story or whether that's that's more a sort of a mid-season story, I don't know. I think the themes possibly are for
But
a future Christmas story.
I also think the characters and the writer have earned this. You know, as fans, we forget what's important to regular viewers, but River Song has become a really important character to regular viewers. And so a Christmas special that sort of finishes River Song's story, that feels like an appropriate place, I think.
I wouldn't say he hasn't earned it. I think he can do what he wants. I'm just talking for myself that you know I wasn't quite as invested in the River Song story as others were, because it seemed to be that every year another River Song story popped up after we thought we'd seen the last River Song story, or we thought we'd seen the end of the River Song story, and then another one pops up and another one pops up. So it always felt like an unplanned series of stories for the most part.
But Happy Accident is, I think that, and I don't think it was meant to work this way, but it just does, is that I think the Peter Capaldi Doctor with River is the relationship that makes the most sense. And I don't think it's just an age thing. I don't think it's an age thing. It is a maturity thing, but I don't think that's literally down to the age of the actors. I think it's it just, the chemistry was there, and it felt story-wise that it all fell into place, that the Doctor was finally ready to say, right, I'm giving you all of me, which I thought was really nice.
Matt Smith obviously always plays it like a little lost schoolboy who has no idea what's going on. You know, hence the visual Graduate reference in one of the episodes. Angels Take Manhattan, was it, where there's the reference to the Graduate? Anyway, let's move on. In fifth place, on 47.08%, The Time of the Doctor, which I think thematically shares a fair amount with The Husbands of River Song, although it's a very, very different episode. But this is Steven Moffat doing a sort of elegy for his first, and, you know, at the time when he was casting him, what he intended to be his only Doctor. And I think this is just a really beautiful end for the 11th Doctor. I think it's just a really lovely story with some great comedy, obviously, with Handels and that. And so, you know, some of the stuff back on Earth is very much in the Steven Moffat comedy Ballhouse as well. But yeah, I think this is a story about, this is kind of, you know, the curator in The Day of the Doctor. This is kind of as if you took the idea for that character and said, well, can we do that character with Matt Smith? And so The Time of the Doctor feels like the curator's story, except it's with Matt Smith instead. And I think the idea of it being about, well, what does Clara need to do to persuade the Time Lords that the Doctor should have more life to continue being a good person? All she has to do is point at him and say, well, he's the Doctor, he is a good person. And of course anybody wants that character to carry on. And so it feels not only like it's an appropriate story for the end of the 11th Doctor, but it feels like a really appropriate story for this part of Doctor Who as well, where we're sort of looking to sort of finish the first regeneration cycle and look forward to a future that's going to be slightly different, which eventually it will be. Not immediately, but eventually it will be. But does feel like The Time of the Doctor represents a kind of turning point in the story, even if the turn doesn't take place necessarily exactly with it. Simon, what do you think of The Time of the Doctor?
I love, there's a certain quality to the storytelling of this, that the way that time passes, and it kind of has that magical storytelling element that is missing from The Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe for me. So I was a big fan of this episode. I remember at the time there was an awful lot of, seemed to be a lot of negative comments, certainly online, about it, which were completely at odds with how I felt about it, because I just felt like an experience, and it felt like a really lovely goodbye to Matt Smith's Doctor. I thought it was one of the best last episodes of a Doctor I'd seen. So yeah,
funnily enough, I've seen a few comments around over the last couple of years that seem to indicate people are sort of coming around to the merits of this. Oh, I used to hate The Time of the Doctor, but I watched it again the other day, and it's really lovely, isn't it? Sort of thing.
Yeah, and it was light, and it was emotional, and the direction on it, I think, is really, really good from what I remember. Particularly that moment with Clara pleading to the Time Lords, that was done exceptionally well. Whether you agree, with what actually happens in the story is another matter. But I don't think you can argue with the fact that that was really gently handled. It was really, really lovely. It was great.
Matt?
Yeah, I liked it. I'm trying to remember why people disliked it, and I think it was because of the way that it kind of perpetuated the Steven Moffat storyline into the Christmas special, and the way it fiddled with Time Lord mythology a little bit. And I guess in the wake of Flux, I think these sorts of criticisms are just looking a little bit kind of small because this is compared to Flux, and I don't mind Flux, and I don't mind the Timeless Children storyline and what that's done, and I quite like Jodie Whittaker, but all of that makes this look like the most traditional of traditional Doctor Who stories, and a bit like Twice Upon a Time, it's a regeneration story as well, and I think Steven Moffat likes to make his regeneration stories kind of maudlin and kind of slightly bittersweet, because obviously they are. And that kind of helps with the Christmas special, because I think for me I quite like depression at Christmas a little bit, or at the very end, or at least I think over cheerfulness depresses me at Christmas. So to have something a little bit more kind of downbeat, but still with the kind of the Matt Smith performance, which is great in this, still with the comedy, but with the kind of this kind of sad sort of long decline of the 11th Doctor. I like that, and that was quite heartwarming, I think.
Well, Christmas Day is 4 days after the shortest day of the year, so in a physical sense, it is the most depressed part of the calendar. But Christmas comes just after the shortest day. So what Christmas and what Steven Moffat uses the Christmas specials, I think, to say is, and he makes this explicit in A Christmas Carol, you've just hit the most depressed part of the year, and actually you're out the other side of it now, and it's going to get less depressed as it goes. So I think that's very much a theme of some of his Christmas episodes, and definitely of the Time of the Doctor, and definitely of A Christmas Carol. Speaking of which, in fourth place, on 54.58%, Ian Charles says, if Clara had gone, it would have been one of the most moving departures ever. Sadly, in the end, it felt like a cop-out, which reduces the whole. He votes it sixth, and so does Alistair Thwaite. Decent enough, but a few too many dreams within dreams going on. Of course it's not A Christmas Carol, it's Last Christmas, which I think is really great. And I'm glad Clara doesn't leave, because this feels not so much like a story that's leading up to her going for good, but a story that's sort of reintroducing her into the life of travelling with the Doctor. The fake out Santa stuff, I think, is terrific. What a brilliant conceit to have Santa be real, but it's all because it's basically taking place in in an episode of Inception or something or whatever. So yeah, I think Last Christmas actually is probably about as scary as Doctor Who ever gets in this period as well. So, this is Doctor Who when it gets a bit darker, but those facehuggers and some of that stuff like that is pretty scary for Doctor Who as well. So yeah, this is perhaps not quite as Christmassy as some of the other Christmas specials, but it's a terrific episode, and given that it's got Santa Claus in it, I think it gets away with being a Christmas special because of that. Matt?
Yeah, it certainly feels Christmassy or looks Christmassy, but as Simon said, this is the one that kind of pastiched Alien, which okay, Superman I can buy as a Christmas movie. Alien is absolutely not a Christmas movie in any way, shape or form for children. This was good. I did like the sort of the inceptionness of it. The Doctor gets crabs, that's fine. I do agree that I think Faye Marcy was great in this, and she's one of those actors and characters who would obviously make a great companion, and it's a real, I think it is genuine. In this case, it's a shame. It's a Jericho level shame that she wasn't able to stay on. having said that, I like Jenna Coleman and I like Clara, so I think the fact that she did stay on, and she stayed on for years, it seems.
About the same length of time as Sarah Jane Smith, more or less.
Yeah. But I like her, so I was quite fine, and I think it's quite sweet for somebody to suddenly change their mind in the middle of filming, and I think the fact that this Christmas special, the nature of it is such that you can kind of change the ending quite easily because it's a dream story. So there's a charm to it.
Simon.
I just think it really works. I enjoy it in much the same way as maybe something like Waters of Mars, because it feels like a really good self-contained adventure that's really well realised. And I think the alien thing, I think my point was more that it was bringing something to the fore that the average viewer, maybe the Doctor Who non-fan, would recognise. So they were able to treat it as part of their Christmas viewing, much like anything else. So yeah, and that scene with the listening to the music to get through the room, that with the actor you were saying about, Matt, I still think is one of the best scenes in Doctor Who ever. I absolutely adored that. So that made it for me. And Nick Frost was great, and I think that was all explained really well. And yes, we've had the kind of dream within a dream thing stuff before, but I don't think we've had it at that level in Doctor Who. So I just thought it all worked really well, and it's a really good, solid Christmassy episode. I think it felt quite Christmassy as well because of because Father Christmas is in it. So you know, this big red lump in the middle of the show to make you feel Christmassy. So that's not me calling Nick Frost a lump, by the way.
I think it was. In third place, on 59.17%, Adrian Sturrock. He votes this second after Day of the Doctor. In fact, both of these two comments are from people who voted this second and only after Day of the Doctor. So really, this is kind of first out of the Christmas specials. Adrian Sturrock says, hugely underrated and gives us a fantastic version of Clara. I would have loved to have seen more of this version of the character. The Doctor as a grumpy loner is a nice change, and we get the introduction of the best TARDIS set of the new series. Phil Markham says, my favourite Christmas special. Great mix of action and comedy and just enough to scare the little kiddies on Christmas Day. They're both right. Brilliant new TARDIS set, by the way. And yeah, that stuff at the start about having to climb up the spiral staircase to get to this TARDIS, it's just so magical at Christmas. It's, you know, Steven Moffat very much in sort of Mary Poppins, I don't know, bedknobs and broomsticks or whatever kind of territory, that kind of magic. The version of Clara that we had here, we almost had in the series, I think. I think the original plan was just to do the one version of Clara in Asylum of the Daleks and then go with the Victorian version, the Victorian, I was going to say mistress then, that's not the word I wanted.
Nanny?
No, she's not a nanny, is she? She's a governess.
Oh, okay.
The Victorian governess, I think, is the version of Clara that Steven Moffat had originally intended going with before he changed his mind and decided to do the third version. Yeah, we could have had more of this version. I don't think ultimately in the long run that would have worked in quite the way as the version that we eventually do get works. But yeah, the Snowmen, it's a terrific piece of television, really, complete with its sort of great intelligence and its Web of Fear references and stuff. Very odd episode of Doctor Who. Not really one of my favourites of these specials. This wasn't in the top half of my list, I don't think. But that's only because I prefer the others, not because I think this is a lesser episode. I think this is a bit more of a jumble than some of the others, and it's a bit less obvious what this one's really about. Whereas some of the others, you know, tell a story in such a, not a straightforward way, but tell a straightforward enough story. Whereas I think the story in The Snowmen is a bit of a jumble. But anyway, Simon.
Yeah, yes, a possible, enjoyable episode. I like this, the visual, the imagery, you know, much like the staircase and things like that, and the snowmen themselves. I felt the great intelligence thing was kind of crowbarred in a way. I don't know I don't know whether it made as much sense to me as it did to other people, that it was a great intelligence at the back of it all. But yeah, I haven't got a great deal. Much like you, it was towards the bottom half, but not through being bad, but just through being not as good as the ones above it. So I've never been drawn back to watching it again in quite the same way as some of the other episodes. So yeah, it was all right.
Matt.
I'm completely the opposite to Simon. That this is the one that I am drawn back to watching it again and again. And actually, I was prepared to defend it, but it's come second out of all the Christmas specials. So it's kind of, it doesn't really need defending, I think. I think because it's set in Victorian times, I like it because you don't have to shoehorn a Christmas village onto an alien planet. You don't have to make an alien spaceship or a spaceship to set it in. This is just set in a very recognisable place that the BBC still, like as with the classic series, the BBC still does period drama really well. And it happens here. And the Victorian period of this nature certainly has all the trappings that you think of as kind of Christmas trappings. And I think it's just the right balance of humour. I love the Sontaran stuff with the mind worm. I did like the great, and completely opposite to Simon, I loved the great intelligence and the idea of this, if you dislocate it from the Web of Fear and the Abominable Snowmen, the idea of this alien entity kind of invading this young boy and kind of living through him into adulthood. So he becomes this kind of shell of a man in adulthood. That's a really creepy thing that you don't, that's quite a sort of special thing in Doctor Who. You haven't seen that as much. In some ways, it's the same story as A Christmas Carol. So it's still things a guy did when he was a kid and having to come to terms with it when he's an adult. But for me, actually, it kind of competes with A Christmas Carol for the best Moffat Christmas special for me.
But obviously, it doesn't compete quite that closely, because in second place, on 71.67%, it is A Christmas Carol. I don't think of this as an adaptation. I think what Steven Moffat does is a little bit disingenuous, because I think he takes the name A Christmas Carol and he takes some of the themes and he takes some of the plot beats of A Christmas Carol, and then he completely reworks them into something entirely different that honours the spirit of the original while being a completely different story, frankly. I think the Doctor Who A Christmas Carol is basically an entirely different story. It's a love story. In A Christmas Carol, the Dickens, it's not really a love story, and certainly not for Scrooge it's a love story. Here, it really is a story about a lost love and what that lost love means to this person. And so it takes that idea from A Christmas Carol and moves it on, grafts it onto a completely different sort of narrative beat. And I think it works really well. And I think this is an astonishing piece of television. I think it's not just one of the greatest Doctor Who episodes ever. I think it's one of the best things that's ever been committed to screen, frankly. I think A Christmas Carol, the Doctor Who version, is just an amazing, astonishing, beautiful, surprising, delightful 60 minutes of television. I just think it's absolutely wonderful. Matt?
Yeah, it's okay. I think it's fine. It's good. I like it more after I rewatched it for the podcast a few years ago, and I actually liked it more on rewatch, and having talked it through on the podcast, I kind of appreciated it a bit more. I think it does. So the idea of a sort of a lost love, I think that is in the story of A Christmas Carol. It just doesn't make it through to the screen adaptations.
Maybe, yeah.
So it's kind of he does sort of pick up on it. But I agree, this is obviously this is Steven Moffat kind of picking up the central idea, as he did with Dracula, as he did with Sherlock, and as he did with Jekyll. Sorry. He picks up the first idea and sort of runs with it. And he does it very successfully in this one. And it's got Michael Gambon in it, and Michael Gambon's really, really good. He occasionally, actually, if I have a criticism, Michael Gambon occasionally gives that sign in his eyes that says he doesn't quite understand what he's in, which some actors do. Derek Jacobi didn't do that. Derek Jacobi knew exactly what he was doing. Michael Gambon sort of turns up, but he's a brilliant actor, but he sort of turns up and looks a bit confused at times. But that kind of works because he's supposed to not understand what the hell the Doctor is. And I think Michael Gambon looks like he doesn't know who Matt Smith is.
It is definitely a tale about two polar opposites, but I think there's absolute fireworks when you put them on screen together. Simon, what did you think of A Christmas Carol?
I think it's a good thing if Michael Gambon turns up and doesn't really know what he's on, because it means we're getting a pure, unaffected, non-Delta performance. So, yeah, I much like Matt's second.
Is that like a Delta wave, or is that a COVID reference?
You know what I mean. You know what I mean.
This is because of my jibe about Lee, isn't it?
No, this is actors being aware of what program they're on, engaging their performance according to what they think they're on. That's my take on it. Yeah, second viewing, I watched it at the time and I thought, yeah, this is okay. It felt like just a straightforward Christmas carolination or a take on it. And then second viewing, realised there was far more to it and how affecting it was. I mean, all the way through all these, it's the emotional resonance which obviously works with me. So, and this one was really top marks as far as that was concerned, really affecting. And yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a great piece of television.
And Flying Sharks.
Flying Sharks, which I thought not sure. And I think it's something that Matt touched upon, is that sometimes watching these things at Christmas, depending on what's going on in the house and how you're watching it, can really affect your viewing. So to take a step back and be able to watch it clean makes a heck of a difference. And I really like the Flying Sharks in the end. I just thought that was a brilliant 2000 AD-ish idea, in the flesh. So yeah, it was really, really good. Cast were all really, really good. Sorry, what's the singer called again? Catherine Jenkins, who I was concerned about because she's not known for acting, was great as well. And to the point where you're not ever given reason to think, oh, she's not somebody who usually acts. So yeah, no, it's top marks on every level.
I was sat here thinking, it's great. Wouldn't it be great to see a Christmas special with Dickens and ghosts in it? And then I realised that Mark Gatiss had already written it, and they shot their bolt in the third episode of the first series, and that really saving that for Christmas would have been if they'd have known.
You can always watch it at Christmas, though, eh? Otherwise, it's a bit like Die Hard, right? We'll get back to that. In first place, not quite everybody's number one. This got 95.42%, which is not actually the highest percentage score we've ever had. Quite, I don't believe. So I think this comes up as second. Although this is out of 9 stories, so I suppose 95.42% out of 9 possible stories is pretty damn high. Phil Markham votes it first and says there really can't be anything that beats this, the perfect multi-Doctor anniversary special we've had so far, and also bringing the late great John Hurt into Doctor Who. Earl Eklund III also says obvious choice, and with John Hurt as the War Doctor, he also votes it first. What can I say? Is this the greatest episode of Doctor Who ever? I think it's pretty much there or thereabouts. It's not the most multifaceted story. It's not the most complicated story. I think it's Steven Moffat doing what he does so often, in that he makes it look a lot more complicated than it is. And he has so many things going on that there's a real talent in making it seem straightforward when he has all these different plates spinning. But in terms of what the story does, I think it's deceptively simple, but at the same time, it's such a brilliant idea. Russell T Davies did this thing where he wanted to tell the story of a damaged Doctor, and in doing so, he had to inflict some damage on the Doctor that really kind of goes against the grain of the character. And although we accepted that because the story of the damaged Doctor that Davis was telling was worth the damage that Davis had inflicted, Steven Moffat says, well, hang on a second, we can still have the damage to the Daleks and to the Time Lords, but we can take it out of the Doctor's hands. And he affects this astonishing story choice that doesn't remotely undermine anything that Davis did, but that absolutely underlines what that character is really all about. And he does it in a way that can be told simultaneously across the globe in almost 100 countries among millions of people who've probably never seen Doctor Who before, that references the series past with multiple Doctors and all sorts of other strange shenanigans, and yet that passes muster for people who've never seen Doctor Who before. It's an achievement that's unparalleled in 50, nearly 60 years now of the programme. It's just a really astonishing achievement. And I think one of the greatest things about it is that really this is a story that's about the series. It's about the fact that it's a television programme, but it's also about the life choices that we all make. So this is really this great big analogy for a human life and the kind of things that we have to do and the kind of choices that we have to make in real life. Obviously not the choice that's made here, but this is a story that makes you sit and think about your choices, I think. I just think it's astonishing. Matt, what do you think of the Day of the Doctor?
It's good. I mean, Steven Moffat does a lot of that accidentally, because like Terrence Dicks with the Five Doctors, he's kind of trying to move all of his pawns into one chessboard, and the pawns keep disappearing from him. So it would have been interesting to have an Eccleston version of this. But I think the Hurt version says more interesting things about the series and about the character, and also insulates the Doctor slightly. And as one of the comments said, we get John Hurt in the series, which is always a benefit.
Well, he's able to sort of cast John Hurt as a classic series Doctor, despite the fact that John Hurt isn't one, in order to offset the modern ones.
Yeah. Watching this the first time, I thought it was great. I was really relieved that he got away with it, and I thought it was really powerful. Watching it a second time, I thought it was great, and really worth rewatching. I haven't rewatched it a lot since then, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how it shifts into kind of nostalgia, and whether it will keep on it will retain this position, because I find it very difficult to watch the Five Doctors now, because I overwatched it and it's a bit too much celebration for a particular time. I think the Day of the Doctor is better than the Five Doctors in many ways, and I think it's definitely wittier than the Five Doctors.
Well, I think it has a message. I think the Five Doctors is a story that's a celebration without really a message. I think the thing about the Day of the Doctor that elevates it is what it's about that choice that the Doctor makes. It's a story about the Doctor's character and about the character of the viewer. I think that's what elevates it.
Yeah, it's good.
Simon.
In a different pair of hands, it could have been all about, well, as you know, with the Five Doctors, it could be just a celebration, and more than likely, in a certain pair of hands, a massive spectacle. And we didn't get that. We got an intelligent piece of television, an intelligent piece of storytelling and character. And I think the fact that Christopher Eccleston didn't come back is one of those happy accidents that it created the idea of the War Doctor, which was a far more interesting story to tell. I mean, I'd even argue that if Christopher Eccleston had turned up late in the day and said, "Oh, I will do it," they should have kept the War Doctor as well, and they had 3 Doctors plus the War Doctor, because the War Doctor is kind of the essence of the story, I think. And equally, you could argue that the whole Timeless Children and this idea of the division that Chris Chibnall's come up with is a second shot at the same idea. And we've been softened to that idea by the War Doctor. We've accepted that there are these incarnations of the Doctor that we knew nothing about, and now suddenly there's a load that were before William Hartnell as well. Well, I could argue the point that we've seen this before.
Yeah,
and it's
they're all
kind
up
of
to
been
shady stuff as well, aren't they?
Yeah. But I can't begin to explain how much I love this, and I think I've watched it 4 or 5 times, and every time it gives you something new, and for me it gets better and better. I don't think it weakens in any way. I don't think there's any kind of cracks in it at all. Maybe David Tennant's Doctor doesn't do as much as you'd think he would, but I suppose that's because he comes from an era of Doctor Who where he was very much, it was all about, again, that word spectacle. It was the spectacle of the Doctor, and this is a story in which he behaves as a character and a supporting character as well. So it's fascinating in that respect. So yes,
I think ideally this should be watched in a trilogy, the Barn trilogy, as it happens, just by coincidence, with Listen and Hellbent for 3 episodes that really dig into the character of the Doctor in a way I don't think I've ever seen anywhere else. I think that's an astonishing evening's worth of entertainment. Anyway, we have currently ongoing on our Facebook page the Flux poll, so we're putting the episodes of Flux into preferential order. We'll be doing that up until about Christmas Day, and then we'll be recording that one shortly after Christmas. And then I think there are 3 more polls left to do of the sort of general run of Doctor Who, which we'll be doing in the new year as we head towards our 10th anniversary. So it'll be 10 years of us podcasting in one form or another come the end of March, and that is what we're heading towards. So those are the things that'll be ongoing. Until then, I was JR.
I was Matt.
I was Simon.
And we will speak again soon. And for anybody who's watching on video, we're just going to keep running for another 15 or 20 minutes and do another Christmas special. So are you guys ready?
Sure, yes.
Okay, let's dive right in. You're listening to Who Review Extra, and for the next quarter of an hour or so, we are going to be talking about the Christmas invasion, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
I am Matt.
And I'm Simon.
And so, yeah, our next story in Who Review Extra was supposed to be Frontier in Space, but because of various reasons, we didn't get to that before Christmas, so I decided we should throw in a Christmas special at Christmas, and I drew a random one out of the hat, out of the 5 or 6 that we've yet to review in podcasting in one form or another, and it was, funnily enough, the very first one, the Christmas invasion, that came out of the hat. So I guess my question is, as it tends to be, what did you think of it when you first saw it, and how does that compare with what you thought of it now? Matt, what did you think of it?
Such a difficult question. I mean, when I first saw Christmas Invasion, it was after the glorious return of Doctor Who. We didn't know anything else. Yeah. It's the first Christmas special ever, and I refuse to accept Feast of Stephen as being a Christmas special, but it was. So this is the first proper Russell T Davies Christmas special. So we didn't know anything else. So how did I feel about it? I was really excited to be watching Doctor Who on Christmas Day, because it was a sign of how it was the first sign on television that Doctor Who wasn't going to be cancelled by Michael Grade again. It was that first. I mean, that whole first season from Rose all the way through. However we were seeing how the viewing figures were holding steady or going up, that was the fear that everything was about to collapse, and they just weren't going to renew it for the second series, or if they had, it would just last for 2 series. But the Christmas special was definitely the sign of the show of confidence by the BBC. It just said that Doctor Who was an institution again now, and in fact it was a bigger institution than it had been since the early 60s.
Sure, but saying all that, what did you think of the actual episode? Because let's be honest, that first series of Doctor Who, when it came back, we all loved that it was back. We were all enthused about it and we were enjoying it, but at the same time, you cannot honestly say that you thought all 13 episodes were of an unparalleled quality. There were some that were better, and there were definitely some that were less good. what did you think of the Christmas Invasion when you first saw it? Do you remember?
I was very distracted watching it. So
I'll ask Simon then.
Genuinely, I don't remember what I thought. I was probably slightly underwhelmed, but it didn't matter that I was underwhelmed because I was relieved they got away with it. I remember watching the first series. My reaction to watching the first series was that it was very urban, very London centric, and that kind of ground me down slightly. That I did feel like it was constantly returning to Earth, constantly returning to London, and that wasn't my Doctor Who comfort zone. That wasn't what I wanted to see. I was overjoyed to see Doctor Who being back, but the fact that it was constantly coming back to council estates in London kind of depressed me. And that's what the Christmas Invasion did. So I can't say I was sort of swept away by the seasonal joy of it for what was on screen, but I was swept away by the seasonal joy of it because it was on screen.
Right, that's our 15 minutes up. Simon, do you want to give it a score? Simon, do you remember what you thought of the Christmas Invasion the first time you saw it?
Yeah, this was the episode where he had to tick all the boxes for the Doctor to be properly back. So we'd had the Doctor himself, we'd had a companion, and then we got regeneration. The regeneration was the last tick box after the Daleks, probably, to say that they're all back. So it was incredibly exciting, I thought. And as I've said before on this podcast, that suddenly the experience of watching Doctor Who in a family on television together on Christmas Day was just like, what is all this? What is this acceptance that we're suddenly experiencing, where Doctor Who's been accepted back into the family, back into the front room? So that was amazing. And my initial reaction, because I wasn't doing a podcast at the time and wasn't overanalyzing every episode, was just initially, wasn't that a load of fun? And wasn't it really cool when his hand got chopped off and he grew another one? And he said, this is a fighting hand. And that's as deep as I thought about it. And I just thought it was just huge fun. I did have a little chortle to myself when David Tennant spent most of the episode lying on his back, because I remember Peter Davison's first story and my sister making the comment, I don't want to watch this anymore because he's just spending the whole story lying on his back. And I did laugh to myself that David Tennant virtually did the same thing. So but yeah, at the time, really, really excited. Rewatches, I'm more distracted by how the show has moved on. I mean, the one of the next times I watched it, we were into the Moffat era, and it felt like the series had really grown up, even in that period, just short period of time, had really moved on. So cosmetically, it feels like a more simple and maybe naive show. But I think it's still entertaining, regardless of the fact that David Tennant doesn't do his big performance until right at the end, and then it's a really, really long, virtually a monologue. So I still enjoy it. It's a really enjoyable episode.
And for myself, I'm about in the same place. I remember watching this and being so entertained by it. I wasn't remotely bothered by any of the niggles, but I remember having a bunch of niggles, and I think over time the story of this episode is that the niggles have grown. So rewatching it a couple of days ago, I think it's really a tale of two halves. The first half is fast moving, massively entertaining, sets a bunch of stuff up, and then the second half the episode essentially takes the form of two scenes which resolutely fail to engage with all the stuff that it's set up in such a way that actually some of it's really annoying. So Rose is a really horrible character in this episode. She's so well performed by Billie Piper, I didn't care when I first watched it, and to be honest, I don't really care that much now, but she is horrible in this episode, and that's never really resolved, because she spends the entire episode moaning, what do I do? The Doctor's not here to save us. And the moment when she steps forward and does something that might possibly make a difference is when the Doctor steps out of the TARDIS and saves the day. So even then, he removes the agency from the character of Rose, even as she finally decides to get a bit of agency in the episode. And then there are other things, like the science of it is shonky. The pilot fish thing, you don't care, because to have the robot Santas is so much fun. What difference does it make? But really, that's you sort of talking about pilot fish, where the whale is in the Marianas Trench and the pilot fish themselves are somewhere up the River Severn. It doesn't make any sense that these pilot fish are on Earth before the Voyager thing, the space shuttle thing that they send out, has even got anywhere near the spacecraft in deep space. There are so many things in this episode that don't really make any sense. And yet, when it comes down to it, Russell T Davies is such a consummately entertaining writer that you really just don't care. And it gets by on that sort of innate Russell T Davies-ness of it. So, yeah, there are lots of things in this episode that kind of niggled me with little annoyances, even back then, even back in the December of 2005 when I first saw it. But ultimately it was, yes, joy. Doctor Who is on at Christmas, and here is this, first example, hopefully the first of several. Who knew it was going to be every Christmas for the next 15 years? Because I thought initially, well, maybe we'll get 3 of these and then it'll probably be something else. So let's dig into the episode itself maybe a bit more. There's Unit in this. The Welsh guy who's the sort of government scientist. The fact that a lot of the story takes place under the Tower of London, all this kind of stuff. The sort of science fiction-y aspects of it. Matt, what did you make of the sort of science fiction-y stuff, the story stuff, the plot stuff?
Yeah, I liked it. So I rewatched it today. And actually I liked it a lot more. I wasn't expecting to. Because actually I don't particularly like the Eccleston series that much. I'm never really sort of drawn to rewatching a lot of it. And as Simon says, I always feel when I see bits of it how dated it is. But rewatching Christmas Invasion, I really got into it today. And yeah, I liked Unit, and I think possibly it's because of Chibnall, and I like the complexity of Chibnall and the kind of the multi-layeredness and the jigsaw nature of Chibnall's, particularly Flux. But this was like a sort of palate cleanser. So actually bringing back Unit, giving you that kind of fairly simple sort of science fiction explanation for what the Sycorax are doing, where they've come from. That was kind of reassuringly simple, I think. I didn't get the problem with the pilot fish. So they're tracking the Doctor's regeneration energy in advance because they're trying to get to the Doctor.
But they're pilot fish. They should be with the Sycorax spaceship if they're pilot fish.
No, they should be ahead of it.
Well,
because they go first.
Yes, but not this. But not by this far, is what I'm saying. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, he's put it in order to have the robot Santas, so he explains it away as being pilot fish, but that's not really what it is.
Yeah, I always felt that the robot Santas were shoehorned in, but this time I actually watched it thinking, no, that makes sense, that's great. And the blood stuff I thought was great, the Sycorax blood stuff. I thought that was ingenious. The way, I think Russell T Davies really kind of tied everything really neatly together in this, so it makes sense. And there's twists in it, and the Sycorax aren't this all-powerful, like, super controlling alien species. They're just using this kind of illusion to try and take over the world, and that's a great twist. I mean,
yeah.
It just worked for me this time.
Fair enough. Simon, how about you? How does it work for you?
Yeah, it just works, I think. I thought of the pilot fish a bit like Galactus's heralds in the Marvel comics, where essentially someone goes forward to seek out the planets that Galactus absorbs and eats. So yeah, I didn't have a problem with it. Yeah, it was nice hearing Unit getting mentioned. That whole thing, we're in the era where little things are being mentioned, like Torchwood. I think it's the first mention of Torchwood, isn't it? Where Hillary...
Torchwood's mentioned in Bad Wolf in the quiz show segment. Yeah.
Weekly, right? Okay. But it's the first time we've seen them in action.
Yeah.
And I suppose.
Sort of. Yeah.
And you've got that little, don't you think she looks tired line, which for me really made me punch the air. It made me think, getting a little bit political here. This is great.
I hated that bit this time. I thought that was so irritating. Yeah, because that's not. I think
that's how politics seemed to be operating at the time, though. It did feel like that was.
I'm not sure it's a million miles away from what's going on at the moment, frankly.
I think. I think it's far more in your face now. But
it was Blair and Bush at the time. I think Blair and Bush. So it was clearly kind of, he doesn't like Blair, and obviously he doesn't like Bush. So there's the whole sort of don't tell the Americans because we don't want a war. That's fine, but I don't know. Don't you think she looks tired was just. It's just not how things work. I don't think it's as clever as Russell T Davies thought it was.
Let's talk about David Tennant then, because this is his grand hurrah. This is not his grand hurrah. This is his grand arrival, and he does spend a lot of it in bed. I think there's a nice bit where he wakes up for a couple of minutes earlier on in the episode just to give you a flavour of what he's going to be like when he does turn up. And of course, when he does turn up, there's about 10 minutes worth of monologue before a fight scene. So you probably get to see as much of him in this episode, condensed fashion, as you might have done had the episode worked in a different way. I think it's slightly an odd idea to keep him out of it for so long, but at the same time, I also think it's a slightly brilliant idea to keep him out of it for so long, because this is the first time you've had a regeneration in the modern revival. And so what you're doing is teasing the audience. The new man's coming. And so, I think that really works. So there's kind of a weird balance going on there between wanting to show your leading man and wanting to keep him off the screen. And I think it just about works. I do find him a bit irritating when he wakes up and does that great big monologue, and especially in retrospect now we see so much more of his performance where he over enunciates so many of his words. Button, he's got the kind of mouth that you just want to put a stick in or a sock in or something and get him to shut up sometimes. But at the same time, overall, I think he's a real breath of fresh air after Christopher Eccleston, who I loved, but Christopher Eccleston's story obviously was a narrative that sort of it started off quite light and headed in towards angst, I think. And David Tennant here, at least, is this big, bright, colourful, brash character who seems so very different that I think it's just the right sort of thing at this point. So Simon, what did you think of David Tennant as he appears, as it were?
Okay, rewinding again, I know you shouldn't really worry so much about what other people think anyway, but as a figurehead for Doctor Who, it felt very exciting that someone so likeable and so entertaining was being the Doctor to make everyone want to watch it some more. So it felt great as far as thinking about the other people in the room, and everyone looked at each other and said, "Well, wasn't he brilliant?" You got the over enunciation and things like that, but I think comedy wise it really worked, and it felt like the Doctor was kind of otherworldly. I think it's interesting that he kind of appeared suddenly switched on, fully formed. So you had none of this stuff about him not knowing who he was going to be. I think all you had that was that line of I know what Doctor this is. This is one that doesn't give second chances or something like that, wasn't it? In essence. And that's as much as we got, because from that point on, we knew who he was. And there was probably more development later on when you get to things like Waters of Mars, where he, the Time Lord Victorious stuff.
And in New Earth, of course, where he gives somebody a second chance in the very next episode, which is bizarre. But there you go.
Yeah. But I did think he was really great and hit the ground running. So yeah.
Matt.
Yeah, I agree. I think I didn't have a problem with his performance, and actually it was more balanced. His presence in the story was more balanced than I remember. So you don't feel, even though he's unconscious, I think the moments when he does wake up, he gives it such energy that it kind of fills the scene. So I think it's quite sensible, sort of keeping him under for a little bit, because you are building up to that final confrontation, which I think worked really well. I think it's a Doctor. I think he does have this kind of slightly irritating turn of phrase, but I think it's purposefully irritating, and I think it's a pomposity. It's a kind of a gobbiness that demands to be punctured. And I think the fault is, I don't think his pomposity is punctured enough. I think people like him and accept him a bit too much. So it's a bit like the Third Doctor. The Third Doctor is clearly irritating and pretentious and pompous, but because there are those moments where he just gets sort of deflated occasionally, that kind of makes it worthwhile. David Tennant doesn't get that deflation, but that doesn't mean that I think that performance is the wrong choice. And it is difficult to watch without knowing that David Tennant is going to make a success of the role, and he's going to last for another 3, 4, 5 years. So you can see his future in this story, and that kind of gives you a bit of a kick.
Do you want to give it a score then, Matt?
Yeah, I'd give it a 7 out of 10.
Fair enough.
It's fun. It's
yeah. Good. About you, Simon?
I'll give it an 8. I'll give it an 8 for very, very similar reasons.
Fair enough. And I'm going to be with Matt. I'm going to give it a 7. Because although I don't care about the niggles, those niggles are still there, and they're unavoidable, I think, for me. Right. Until we do this again and finally do get around to watching and talking about Frontier in Space, a saga that's been going on for several years since we chose to do it on the Blue Box podcast and never got around to it. Until then, I was JR.
I was Matt.
And I was Simon.
And we do wish you all a very Merry Christmas.
Oh, yeah, Happy Christmas. And a Happy New Year.
Indeed. Right.